checking and fixing wall thickness is something we're always going to have to do for 3D printing. You must make sure your model is strong enough to support its own weight. And some printing techniques are a little bit more rigid about this than others. The model you see on screen I also used for the checking wall thickness tutorial, because I know it has some problems if I want to print it not too big. Make sure you have your units in Blender set correctly. In this case I am working in the metric scale at a scale of 1, which makes one Blender unit 1 meter. So I'm working at 1 meter and my model is 10 centimeters tall. Let's see where the problems are in this model. To do that, I'm going into edit mode, and in edit mode I want to make sure that in the transform panel, this panel on the right, the mesh debug option is enabled. If you cannot see any colors like this and your model still looks a little bit gray like in object mode, check your modifiers. If your modifiers are on, mesh debug doesn't work. This is in Blender 2.67. In later versions it might work with all modifiers as well. So I will disable my modifier and have a look. You can see clearly that the antlers are having some trouble. Some of it is at a lower level than 2 millimeters. I can actually get a slightly more accurate reading if I apply the subsurf modifier so that we get all these points, and it's still clear to see that there are some issues here. The very simple foolproof method that will always fix wall thickness is if we make our model bigger. So I'm going to do it in edit mode. I'll select everything and I'm going to scale it up, and you can see the colors changing here in the antlers. And I'll make it bigger and bigger and bigger. You see there's just a little bit of a problem left. Still make it bigger. I'm scaling the entire object by clicking on S and moving my mouse. And this little point is just because it's so sharp, it's not going to change, but I think it would be printable. So at this scale, this model should be printable. I don't see any real problems. Nothing is colored. Except there's one little problem. If I go into object mode, you can see this is now 75 centimeters tall. Which makes the volume, if I look in the print 3D tools, I can get a volume reading from it. That is 11,845 cubic centimeters. If you go to commercial service and you pay, let's say, $2 per cubic centimeters, that is $20,000 to $23,000 to have this printed. Maybe this is not the best way to make sure you don't have any wall thickness issues. I've returned to the original file with the 10 centimeter stag, and I want to make sure that at this size we don't have any wall thickness problems. I'll go into edit mode to make sure everything's okay. Down here at the bottom you can see what I'm doing with my mouse. Of course, one thing is, if you want to make things thicker, you do it by selecting a face, for instance. You move it away from the other side and you can see instantly the color goes gray. I've moved it away from the other side and it's fine now. One way you can make sure that you move things in the right direction away from the rest is by using the widgets. I will select a face that needs to be moved. We'll look from the front and I'll select this one, for instance. I want to make sure I move it away in the right direction, irrelevant of from where I'm looking. I will enable the widgets down here and put it in normal mode. Normal means the blue line in the widget points straight out of the polygon that you have selected. So I have it selected and I click on the blue arrow and drag away until it becomes gray. In this case, because of the angle with the rest, I have to draw it away very far. I'm not really happy with the result, and here's a way to fix that. Instead of doing it one face at a time, you select a series, for instance all of the ones down here. I did this by holding Alt on my keyboard and clicking on the line between two faces. It selects everything around here. And now I want to fatten the leg. If it's fat enough, there shouldn't be a problem with a skinny face or a skinny leg. So we transform. There's a shortcut key, but I'll show you where it is. It is Alt S, and we fatten it by moving our mouse away in this mode. So we fattened the leg. The lower part has no problem. This has a little problem, but just because this is very narrow, what we can do is go into point select mode, select these two, and I think if we scale this up, you see it's gone grey, because that was very narrow. Of course, that's moving points individually using fatten. Last, if you select a entire shape, we can scale it. Click on S, just scale the bottom part until it's all grayish. See where we are? This is all grey. One thing to look out for though is, like here, you can see these two are green. The reason they are green is not because they're opposed to each other and the room between them is very small. It is because it's also measuring from this face to here, and it's a very narrow edge. If we make this edge a little bit softer, I'll look from below and I'll see it a little bit. See, if we make the edge a little bit softer by moving the point away, it also becomes grey. It's not necessary for the actual print in this case to make it a softer edge, but it is very nice for us because our check will tell us that there are less points that are not printable. This is the way to do it by hand. Now let's have a look at a way to do it for the entire mesh automatically. The way I showed you just before, doing everything by hand, is of course the way to make absolutely sure you get the result that you want, and it's really, really clean because you're in full control. It can be a little bit slow, however. So instead, let's have Blender modify our mesh for us to fix it automatically. And I say modify with a reason, because we can use the solidify modifier. It's a tool I've used multiple times in tutorials about this because it's so incredibly useful. You can switch off the mesh debug and go into object mode. In object mode, I go to the modifiers. I already have a subsurf that adds extra points, makes it nice and smooth and detailed, and I add another one called solidify. Now it makes my entire model a huge mess. That's because it's making a skin, an extra one on the inside of my model, 1 centimeter, that's the value right now, 1 centimeter away from the old skin. And if I look at it in edit mode, you can see really clearly it's trying to make an extra point here, but all the way over here. So it's much too high a value. In my case, I'd like an extra skin, maybe let's make it 3 millimeters away. And you can see instantly it jumped to just here. That's where the extra skin is. Except it's still poking in through the antlers. This is because it's doing it on the inside, right? So we're making an extra skin on the inside, and sometimes it pokes through the other side if it's too far away. What we can do instead is make the skin on the outside. You do that by setting the offset to +1 instead of -1. And you see the entire model has become very gloopy, really big. It's made it on the outside. The reason it's become this thick is it's adding 3 millimeters on all sides of your model. So if I have a really thin part that's maybe 1 millimeter thick, it's adding 3 millimeters on the left and 3 millimeters on the right, which makes it 7 millimeters thick. That's very, very thick. In this case, I said I wanted to make sure it was at least 2 millimeters thick. So I need to add at the very most 1 millimeter in front and 1 in the back to make 2 millimeters. So I make it 1 millimeter. Oh, not 1 meter. You see, I just typed in 1 and Blender uses 1 as 1 meter, so 1, and I have to type both m's for millimeter. And it's not too thick. This is a pretty nice result, but we have to clean it up a little bit and it's not perfect. I will show you in a second. First, I want to apply the modifiers. Usually save a version of the Blender file that has the modifiers, then apply it and then export. I will apply this and I will show you why we have to clean it up. We still have the old skin on the inside. This is still a double skin on here. What we can do is in edit mode, there's a very nice tool for this. We can do mesh, vertices and separate by loose parts. We've got an outer skin, that's the new one, and the old inner skin, and we want to separate the two. So we'll separate them by loose parts. We can already see it separated. Go back into object mode. I will select the old inside and move it to the side. And this is the one we export. We can throw the old inside away, keep the outside. But have a close look, because Solidify is really nice. Downside is it does everything very literally, and it does it to your entire mesh. You can have issues in concave corners. For instance, here you can see between the ear and the antler, everything has scrunched up a bit. This is all a little bit messy. The antler is sticking inside the ear. That's something you might have to clean up manually. Most printers should be able to print this fine. Some others really want a neat mono hull that doesn't stick into itself. Fixing intersections or self intersections is part of another one of my tutorials. This is, I think, all we can do for wall thickness.